All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you are. Today, we are here to talk to the incredible Candacy Taylor. Candacy has recently published the young adult adaptation of Overground Rail. Overground Railroad, the young adult adaptation, The Green Book and the Roots of Black Travel in America. This is a young reader's edition of Candacy Taylor's acclaimed book about the history of the Green Book, the Guide for Black Travelers. Overground Railroad chronicles the history of the Green Book, which was published from 1936 to 1966, and was the Black Travel Guide to America. For years, it was dangerous for African Americans to travel in the United States. Because of segregation, Black travelers couldn't eat, sleep, or even get gas at most white-owned businesses. The Green Book listed hotels, restaurants, department stores, gas stations, recreational destinations, and other businesses that were safe for Black travelers. It was a resourceful and innovative solution to a horrific problem. It took courage to be listed in the Green Book, and the stories from those who took a stand against racial segregation are recorded and celebrated. This young reader's edition of Candacy Taylor's critically acclaimed adult book, Overground Railroad, includes her own photographs of Green Book sites, as well as archival photographs and interviews with people who owned and used these facilities. The book also includes an author's note, endnotes, bibliography, timeline, and index. Candacy Taylor is an award-winning author, photographer, and cultural documentarian. Her work has been featured in over 50 media outlets, including the New Yorker, and The Atlantic. She is the recipient of numerous fellowships and grants, including the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University and the National Endowment for the Humanities. You can visit her website at tailormadeculture.com and follow her on Twitter at Candacy Taylor. I am so thrilled that you are here with us today. It's so exciting to have authors back in the store, and I'm thrilled that you are here to celebrate this wonderful book. I am wondering if we could start by talking just a little bit about how it was to adapt such a magnificent book for young readers and what your thoughts and processes and goals were.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. It's been an interesting process because when I first sold the book to Abrams, it was a one-book deal. It was for the adult version that was published in 2020. And they, from the beginning, wanted a young adult version. And I don't have kids, so I was intimidated because I thought, how do I, it was hard enough. It was just write the adult book and then we'll get there. So I agreed to do it. And now we're here. And it was a really easy process. I was with the support of Abrams, because this is their wheelhouse. They know how to write, they know how to publish books for this age group. So my editor, because we had worked so closely on the adult version, really knew the material. And it's very similar in the sense that it's still, it's my voice is a lot of that what's in the adult book is in the young adult book, but there are things that we had to dig a little deeper on and explain a little further, like redlining or urban renewal, or, we took out some of the stuff about mortgages and things that kids just really wouldn't need to deal with it, or understand. So in that way, it was really great. But it wasn't until after the book, The Young Adult, came out that I realized how special this age group is, because it's for ages 12 and up. In terms of, it's a really fragile age. It's a really vulnerable time in your life because your body's changing. All of a sudden you care about how you look, or you realize that people are judging you based on your looks, and your face is changing, and all these things you'd have no control over are happening. And you can feel very self-conscious and vulnerable. And so I think that's the perfect age to learn about race, because I think you can have more empathy about how it feels to be judged unfairly based on things that you can't control. So in that way, I didn't really come to that realization until the book was coming out. I was like, this is really important. And I have been speaking at different schools over the last several weeks, and realizing how little this age group knows about the Great Migration, about a lot of the themes that, this book is dealing with. So in some ways I thought this would just supplement what they already know, but in some ways it's kind of the basis of, new information for them. So it's exciting.
Cliff is here with us as well, so he will be asking questions. And I'm Shane, the event coordinator. So the voice coming from just the middle of nowhere. I'm super curious, and I kind of know from the adult version, but the Route 66 going through St. Louis, and I'm curious if there are any local history, local information about St. Louis or Missouri that are included in the young adult adaptation.
I don't know if they're in the young adult adaptation necessarily. I mean, we definitely talk about St. Louis because it is one of those destination cities that was part of the Great Migration, which, is where we find the most Green Book sites clustered in the traditional Black neighborhoods. So, for instance, in St. Louis, I don't remember the name of the neighborhood, but it's like Taylor Street and Page. What's the name of that neighborhood here? The Sarah Lou Cafe. There's all these places, and it's about 5 minutes from the bookstore. Taylor and Delmar Streets. Is it Vandalier or Vanda something?
No.
I'm sure your reader, I'm sure the locals will know.
It is literally like it's
about 5 minutes away.
Yeah.
That is, a unique and yet very typical story of the American, migration and segregation, because these are, even today, it's still the poverty and just the buildings that are still boarded up. And there is one on a corner at, I believe it is Page and Taylor, that was an old liquor store that is still, the sign is still there, but it's not operating. Sarah Lou Cafe shut down, but it was just iconic for this community. And I think the loss of these places and the way that many of these neighborhoods look today was very heartbreaking to me, honestly. And so I talk about in the later part of the book how difficult it is to see these communities struggling the way they are. And it's really through disinvestment with, city and state legislation, and how it is kind of taken back. And we can take back these moments in these communities by being more engaged in our policies, and making a fair, and making it so that it's not something that just happened. It is something that we have allowed to happen, or we've been participating in that process. So for me, it's really challenging to see these, whether it's Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, Chicago. And so the end of the book really discusses, like, why do these communities look this way? It's not because Black folks don't want to work as hard. It's not because they don't care about their communities. There are social and political forces at play. And so that's a hard thing for, to explain for kids. But I think the book effectively does this as it looks through each chapter, showing how that pendulum of justice would swing forward and when we've taken steps back as a country. So I think St. Louis is significant because it is just iconic in that storyline. And yet we still do find, glimmers of hope. And there are places that are still operating. There's an old bank that was in St. Louis and that was in the Green Book. It's not operating now, but the building is still there. And the fact that there were banks in the Green Book was so significant, and there were only a few. So the fact that St. Louis has one was very exciting. So so St. Louis is a big theme in the Green Book.
For the book I'm actually reading right now, a fiction mystery, mentions the Green Book, and it is a white narrator who realizes as they are walking up to a cafe that with their Black driver, that he will not be able to go in with them. And it was knowing that this event was coming up, it especially jumped out at me off the page as being just another example of how much it affected people's lives, how even local travel for individuals within close to their hometowns was difficult. And there have been other, the Green Book, the movie, and other kind of pop culture things that have really been bringing this into people's attention. And your book obviously is doing a lot of that work. And I'm wondering if you have been helping people with adding information to and making certain that things are accurately portrayed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I started doing this work in 2013, long before most people knew what the Green Book was. I stumbled onto it by accident, writing a travel guide for Route 66, where half the counties on Route 66 were sundown towns. And I thought, well, how in the world do Black people travel Route 66? And that's how I learned about the Green Book. But again, it was kind of a rabbit hole I found at the Autry Museum. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. So it was in even though my book wasn't published till 2020, and I was doing all this field research during that time and learning everything I could. I got a fellowship at the Schoenberg Center because they have the largest collection of Green Books in the country. But this was before they digitized their editions. So it's been a very interesting process of watching how it has evolved in popular culture and media, because only a couple of other historians and creatives at the time even were publishing anything about the Green Book in, say, the New York Times or different publications. So it's difficult to get your arms around it because now it's such a big thing. I mean, when I used to go to the Los Angeles Public Library, they had 13 or 11 editions, and they would just hand them all to me. And I would just sit there looking through them, and now, their one edition could go for auction at like $30,000. And so now when I just went to the Los Angeles Public Library, they've got them under it's in the rare books division. It's lock and key. You can't, you have to have supervision. It's a whole thing. But when I started, it's like nobody knew. So it's been an interesting process because there's so much information that is incorrect online. Even when I was writing the book, I discovered a new edition as I was writing the book. There's still many editions we haven't even seen yet. We didn't even know there was a 1936 edition that existed. We were questioning that, even though it was supposed to have started in 1936. There was nothing we could show that was proof of that until I had the book that was supposed to, my manuscript was due in about 3 months, and I just found that. So even stuff I had written or had published earlier on has changed. So it's this kind of moving target. So it's been challenging. But in terms of the movie, I think out of all the other manifestations in the media that you see it pop up in, Lovecraft Country or whatever, most people have been as respectful as possible to get it right, even if they get it wrong. But the movie, I have to say, was really egregious in its just use of the title, because it really had nothing to do with the Green Book. Universal Studios did approach me about and I did a video for them. I'm supposed to be on some DVD somewhere explaining what the Green Book was, because that was the first question audiences had in their test screenings after they saw the movie. They said, "What is a Green Book?" So, I think Farrelly thought it was from what I've read, he said he thought when he found out about the Green Book, he didn't know such a thing existed. And he was like, I'm going to name my movie after that. And yet me and the few other people in the Green Book world knew this was being filmed in New Orleans. And we were asking, has anybody approached you about it? And they didn't come to any of us, whereas it was really unfortunate because there were missed opportunities. I felt like even the few references that the film made about the Green Book were really unfair and incorrect. It was really misrepresented. It was shown as, Dr. Shirley is this very, upstanding, very, wealthy and high-minded musician who can't stay in a certain hotel because of he's Black, and his driver puts him in this place that the Green Book had that was kind of downtrodden place, and it was really, he felt very uncomfortable. And the truth was, at that time in that city, if he had the Green Book, they would have gone to the A.G. Gaston where King stayed, and it was a classic, beautiful place. And that was the whole point of the Green Book, is it gave you options, and it just, to me, it would have been just a simple, afternoon just on the phone with filmmakers would have been a whole different film. So but that is not unusual. That happens to us, but we haven't even gotten our hands around it as Black folks of what the Green Book had, what it has to offer. We're still learning so much about it. And so I anticipate that there will be more, snafus along the way. But one last thing I'll say is I'm excited that the Automotive Hall of Fame they are inducting Alma Duke and Victor Green into the Automobile Hall of Fame. So that's really exciting, and that'll happen this summer. So but they are at least working directly with me to make sure they get all the history right. So it's nice.
Excellent. Do you have any questions?
Well, so yes, I guess would you suggest, I guess, teachers use the young adult version? Like, what information should they be focusing on? How do they use it as a guide? And what sort of lesson plans, or did you think of that as you were?
Well, we definitely have some lesson plans that were created for the adult guide as well. So, and there will be some if they're not already up for young adults. So, but I think, the basic, what I'm learning from young audiences so far on this book tour is just really getting them to understand the whole point of the Great Migration and why people were moving. It was one of the largest resettlement of any group of people possibly in the world. I mean, there were over 6 million people who were fleeing racial terror in the South. So it wasn't just that they were leaving for better opportunities. And I think we've sanitized this whole reason why Black folks were leaving. But for the most part, they were really seeking, safety, and they wanted to start a new life. And then what they found in the North were so many almost covert operations that still segregated them in these really fundamental ways. So I think this narrative that the South was bad and that the colored signs were the problem, and that once they moved north, they were treated fairly. It's just not true. It's not true. So I think just even cleaning that narrative up and using the book to show, because there's so many northern places where there were these clusters where Black folks were living, but they were clustered there for a reason. And there were so many things like redlining and urban renewal that really shaped how these communities functioned. And so for me, I think it's the larger narrative about America's kind of grappling with this idea of racial equality. It's not that, America was a bad country. I think the idea that that equality and democracy it's kind of an experiment that has never quite proven to work yet. No other country has really achieved this. So it's not that we're these huge failures because we can't do it, but the idea that we pretend that we've done it is the problem, And so I think really understanding how big what we are proposing to do as a free and fair and equal society has never really been done before. And the fact that we have not achieved it yet, it's okay, but we're never going to get there if we don't even admit that we have this problem. So I think to me, that would be the biggest lesson that teachers could really get their students to understand. It's not that, as a country, we've done all these bad things. We've tried and failed, but we have to keep trying.
One thing that I remember from school is doing a lot of oral histories, and this is part of a lot of people's living history. And you interviewed living people for this book. So I'm wondering if students and teachers couldn't also do that and talk to their friends, their family, their elders about some of their experiences traveling with the Green Book.
Absolutely. I learned so much from my own parents. My stepfather, Ron, I had no idea. There were stories that he told me that even though I'd known him since I was 12, he didn't trust me with these stories until I started working on this project. So, I think when there's an opportunity to have context and understanding about a subject, maybe when people share more. So, yeah, I think this book could be a catalyst for those kinds of discussions. And I don't know. I mean, maybe great grandparents for their age may have a Green Book in their attic or something. And those, like I said, they're going for auction at $30,000. So, maybe dig around and see what you have. Also, the thing is, the Green Book, it's the biggest brand right now of Black travel, but there were other guides. There were nearly a dozen other Black travel guides during this time. The reason why we're talking about the Green Book is because it was publication for the longest period of time. It had the widest readership, but there were others as well. And so, uncovering those histories, I think, of just even finding old other Black travel guides and discussing the purpose of them. And obviously, we have these devices right now. It's so easy to just record the stories. So when you're talking to people, just hit the record button. So you have it, and archiving, our history, because we've lost a lot of them, a lot of these stories.
Yeah, it's a fantastic idea. The idea of uncovering, all of us uncovering this history that's largely been lost to time. Standing on your shoulders as you laid the groundwork for it's much appreciated. Thank you. Yeah, my grandmother loves the adult version. She called me and made me get it when you were here.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so great. No, I think it's been interesting to see the different age groups. The boomer. Yeah, my sister. I'm just right at the cusp of boomer age, and then to see the younger, even those in their 30s that are just like, I know I was angry for a reason, but I didn't know, this makes sense. I can use this material now to make sense of why I'm seeing what I'm seeing. And I think that, to me, at every generation, it really does have a different impact. For a lot of, maybe for your grandmother, I've heard, I just heard the other day, a man who had fought in World War II, it was just so upset. He's like, this is just, it's hard to read this and keep hearing about this because I wonder what was it all for? I still came back and I was, not treated like a full citizen, even though I'm fighting for other people's rights, across the world. And there's a chapter in the book that really addresses that, again, that disparity, that dichotomy between what we claim as freedom here, we still haven't achieved. So, yeah, and I think, bringing up that trauma is very real for people who've lived through it. So I'm honored that, people like your grandmother still want to engage with this, because I can't imagine how frustrating and painful it probably is.
Yeah.
And there are moments of hope in the book, but it really is showing why. It's really more about why we're where we are.
Yeah, context building.
And I think reframing it in a way that, hopefully those that are young now can see, maybe be inspired by Victor Green, because he saved how many millions of lives by solving he had a very simple solution to this really complicated problem. And I think he's, in some ways, was the Steve Jobs of his time. I'm sure when he made this travel guide, it was really for his neighborhood in Harlem. It wasn't supposed to go all around the world. I mean, this book was all throughout the country within a few years, and then it was in 33 countries in Africa by the 60s. I mean, it really grew because there was such a need for it. But it's like when Steve Jobs put a camera in a phone, I'm sure he didn't think, and he was gone by the time it became this, icon for the new civil rights era. I mean, it was because we captured George Floyd on video, the murder of George Floyd on video, that the world responded. So I think in some ways, Victor Green, he has 7th grade education. He didn't have any money or resources. I mean, he had a lot of courage and audacity to do it anyway. But what he accomplished was so incredible. So I think you don't have to be brilliant. You don't need an Ivy League education. You don't have to have money to, create something that just solves a simple,
Yeah, you just have to spot a need and,
Yeah.
and have a way to fill it.
And follow it.
Yeah.
Well, if you wouldn't mind holding up a copy of the book.
Oh, great.
So
Yes.
you will be signing copies of the book after we stop being live. So those will be available at left-bank.com, or if you are here in St. Louis, want to come in, find it on our shelves, it will be there, signed copies. It has been such a pleasure to get to chat with you again, because I was actually here for your hardcover tour of the adult book, and just, you're so fantastic and full of so much incredible information, and I'm thrilled that young adult readers will now have greater access, more applicable access for them at their hands.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor
Thank
to
you.
come back.
All right, and to everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.